So we will start out in this room, and then later we will have to move to another room for some breakout sessions, because unfortunately it's not possible to do breakouts here in this space. But in the beginning, for now, we will just start here. So when we look at the at what we're active at doing right now as humanity, trying to solve the big problems, to me it feels a little bit like we're trying to cook something, cook a recipe, follow a recipe without really knowing what we're actually cooking. So fulfilling the SDGs and trying to solve the SDGs without having any idea of what the future might look like is a bit weird. But at the same time, it is pretty difficult and a vast exercise to come and dream up a future, that a world that's or the way the world might look like when we solve the SDGs.
I'm sorry, may I just intervene and ask you something?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, but how you assume that we don't know how we want the future to look like?
Well, we will go into that, and but just a tiny little hint at why it is difficult for most people to imagine the things in a different way than we're used to them. Maybe you remember at the beginning of the COVID-19 situation, one of the things that people did was go out and buy toilet paper.
Yeah, so I'm just then making sure that then you were talking not about like unit group, like I mean people who are now participating, but about average person. That average person can't imagine the future, you mean, right?
Yeah, and we also, your future might be different from mine.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Okay. So people went out to buy toilet paper, right? Most of them.
Yes.
Yeah. So they did that because they were afraid that they couldn't clean themselves when they went to the toilet after a couple of weeks, maybe, right? But if they had some exposure to Islamic culture, they might know that there are other ways of cleaning yourself. And they're very easy to implement. You can buy a bidet addition to your toilet seat for $20 off Amazon, or you can just use a hose pipe.
Exactly.
So most people have no idea of those images that you can create, right? So it is important, but and also hard to create these images. We need this because we need something like the JFK moment when we when JFK stood up and said, okay, let's fly to the moon and back. That was pretty easy because it was focused on one country and it was one exercise. Now we have to do this in a global way and with many, many more dimensions, taking into account many, many more dimensions than he ever had to take into account. One guy who tried this a long time ago, 1932, was Winston Churchill. He wrote an essay called 50 Years Hence. And in that essay, he described the world how he saw it in 1982. And he predicted things like gene editing, like vertical farming and solar energy. 1932. In weird terms, it was a very weird description, but that was what he came up with, and it was still very impressive. So I tried a similar exercise, and the first thing I thing I ran into was, how do I actually describe a whole world? And I came up with 6 dimensions to help me with that. Dimensions that if you cut through society or the way we do things as humanity, I think you can, just by describing these 6 dimensions, describe essentially all activity humans could encounter or engage in. And with these 6 dimensions, first I wrote a little book around those, and then I turned that into a model of envisioning the future, a very playful model. Because I found that with another model that's I'd created with a company that is being used for strategic purposes in large corporates, it's very, very hard and very intense to go through that process. It has to be something light, something easy. That's something that everybody can engage in. So what I want to do with you guys today is go through a very, very fast-paced version of that game, and invite you to play that game in a longer version with friends, with your teams, with your family, with whoever you want, in order to spread the idea of being able to easily, playfully think about the future. And the way we will do this is in several steps. The first step is I will now go through those dimensions. I will also post them. And then I invite you to take a couple of minutes to think them through for yourself, to write down a couple of notes for each of them. And after that, we will head over to another Zoom where I can create breakout sessions. And then we will do one, or if we have enough time, multiple iterations of meeting with other people and comparing notes around these narratives. So that's the the super fast version that we have, because we have 22 minutes left now. Usually you could do this with 50 people in 2 hours comfortably, or with a larger group, or also, of course, a smaller group over long periods. And what you would do in this longer sessions is that you actually create convergent narratives. You put your narratives together and create an entirely new one. And then you meet with another group and put their narratives together and create another one. So that out of the entire group, after a while, after a couple of iterations of this, one common narrative emerges. And what was very interesting is that they're very often very similar across the globe whenever I do this. Okay, let's begin. Dimension number 1 is, how do we organize supply? So this is, how do we source material? How do we refine it into products, and how we distribute these? And which products do we produce, why, and who receives them, etc. How do we structure society is the second, which means that how do we make decisions on a local level, on a global level, who makes them, how are they enforced and legitimated, etc. Dimension number 3, how do we relate to people? Does that change? Do we have families? Do we have small communities? Do we have romantic relationships? How does that all work? How do we nurture the body in 50 years? So how do we feed ourselves? How do we stay healthy? And how do we restore health if it breaks down? How do we manage knowledge? So how do we define when something becomes knowledge? How do we agree that something is knowledge? How do we spread it? How do we give access to it? And how do we teach it? And then last but not least, how do we mind the spirit? Which means that how do we deal with the things that we know that are there, that are more than the sum total of the things that of our atoms? So I'm going to paste those into the chat if that is possible. And also another Zoom link, somehow that's not possible to paste that into the chat. A Zoom link that I invite you to get into at 17 past the hour. so that we can work in smaller groups again. So is everybody on board? Does it work for you?